This meme refers to a viral photo that is circulated widely online. It typically features two maps of the United States placed one above the other. The top map shows alleged clusters of mysterious disappearances, while the bottom map displays the layout of America's largest cave systems. The visual similarity between the two maps is intended to suggest a correlation, implying a possible link between unexplained disappearances and underground cave networks in the US. It's important to note that the top map does not take into consideration all disappearances across the country, particularly those in urban areas, which account for many missing persons cases. Instead, it specifically depicts cases associated with Missing 411, a term coined by author and former police officer David Paulides. These cases involve strange disappearances, primarily in national parks, that often defy logical explanation. Paulides' criteria for a Missing 411 case typically include strange circumstances. These include people vanishing within a short distance of others without being seen, victims being found miles away in seemingly inaccessible areas, tracking dogs losing the scent entirely, and other inexplicable factors. The map was originally created by Paulides to illustrate the geographic distribution of these cases. The perceived overlap between Missing 411 clusters and cave systems has led to various conspiracy theories. Some claim that human traffickers use cave networks to abduct hikers and move them undetected. Others suggest cryptids like Bigfoot inhabit these caves, or that feral humans live underground, preying on lost hikers. While intriguing, many of these theories are based on flawed assumptions. First, the viral map often shared on social media is typically slightly edited to exaggerate the alignment between missing persons cases and cave systems. Second, caves themselves are inherently dangerous environments. People can fall into them accidentally or become lost while exploring, especially in the remote terrain of national parks. Lastly, because many national parks feature numerous caves, it's not surprising that disappearances might occur near such systems, simply due to how widespread they are there. On February 25, 2022, 5 commercial divers employed by Land and Marine Contracting Services were conducting routine maintenance on one end of a subsea pipeline at Berth 6 of the Paria Fuel Trading Company facility in Point Pierre, Trinidad and Tobago. The pipeline, which belonged to Paria Fuel Trading Company, a state-owned enterprise, was a 30-inch diameter U-shaped structure. One end of the pipeline was connected to Berth 5, used for offloading fuel from tankers, and the other to Berth 6, which led to the refinery. To facilitate work inside the pipeline, a hyperbaric chamber or habitat was installed at the Berth 6 end. This chamber, pressurized with air to displace water, provided a dry working space for divers without the need for full immersion in diving suits. The 5 LMCS divers, Kazim Ali Jr., Yusuf Henry, Faisal Kurban, Rishi Nagasar, and Christopher Boudrim, were working within this chamber when they began removing an inflatable plug, which had been inserted into the pipeline approximately 2 weeks earlier. Unbeknownst to them, this plug had caused a latent pressure differential between the pressurized chamber and the rest of the pipeline. Upon removal of the plug, a delta P event occurred. The sudden drop in pressure inside the chamber allowed seawater to violently rush in, creating a suction vortex that dragged the divers and equipment deep into the pipeline. The divers were carried into the pipeline and eventually ended up in a submerged section that contained an air pocket, where they remained alive, but injured from the force of the event. At first, the men held onto each other, forming a human chain, as they attempted to navigate the narrow, pitch-black pipeline, filled with oil residue and seawater. They had access to 2 scuba tanks, and oxygen was limited. At one point, they reached a section of the pipeline that was completely submerged, making further progress impossible as a group. The least injured diver, Christopher Boudrim, decided to continue alone in the hopes of reaching help. Equipped with one of the tanks, he began crawling through the pipe. As Boudrim moved forward, he noticed his air supply deteriorating. Fortunately, he encountered another scuba tank which provided additional oxygen. Eventually, he reached the end of the pipeline and began pounding on the pipeline walls to attract attention. He was eventually discovered and rescued by LMCS personnel. Once brought to the surface, Boudrim immediately informed responders that the other divers were alive and still trapped inside the pipe. Divers were sent to investigate, knocking along the pipe and receiving responsive banging from inside, confirming the presence of survivors. Despite this, Paria Fuel Trading Company made the decision not to launch an immediate rescue, citing risk to life and liability. Over the next hours, periodic sounds were still heard from inside the pipe, yet no functional rescue efforts were mounted. By the time proper recovery operations commenced, all 4 remaining divers had perished. Autopsy reports were inconclusive, with potential causes of death ranging from drowning, asphyxiation, or trauma from pressure changes. The public and families of the deceased harshly criticized Paria's management of the incident, especially its delay and obstruction of rescue efforts. In response, the government of Trinidad and Tobago launched a commission of inquiry. In its final report, the commission concluded that Paria exhibited gross negligence, particularly in failing to recognize and address known hazards, not having an adequate rescue plan, and actively hindering LMCS or third-party efforts to save the divers. The COE recommended that the Director of Public Prosecutions consider corporate manslaughter charges against Paria Fuel Trading Company. Between 2002 and 2012, nearly a dozen violent incidents and murders across the Philippines were linked to people singing My Way in karaoke bars, with one case dating back as early as 1998. The frequency and strange consistency of these events led local media to coin the term My Way Killings, referring to the seemingly cursed pattern of violence surrounding the performance of the iconic song. Reports indicated that disputes often erupted over poor renditions, hogging the microphone, or mocking someone's performance. In some karaoke bars, My Way was even removed from playlists entirely due to its violent associations and the superstitions that grew around it. At one point, many Filipinos avoided singing the song in public altogether, with the last reported My Way killing occurring on June 2018. Several theories have been put forward to explain the phenomenon. One suggests that the song's sheer popularity in a karaoke-loving nation like the Philippines naturally led to more incidents, simply due to its frequent performance. Another theory points to the song's vocal difficulty, which could result in off-key renditions and provoke ridicule or anger. A final theory focuses on the lyrics themselves, interpreted by some as arrogant or defiant, possibly triggering hostility in already tense environments. On the morning of September 29, 1982, in Elk Grove Village, a suburb of Chicago, 12-year-old Mary Kellerman complained of the early symptoms of a cold. Her parents gave her one extra-strength Tylenol capsule to ease her symptoms. Tragically, she died shortly after. Later that same day, 27-year-old Adam Janus, a postal worker from the nearby town of Arlington Heights, also died unexpectedly. He had taken Tylenol as well. Initially, doctors believed he had suffered a heart attack. While gathered at Adam's house to mourn, his brother Stanley and his wife Teresa both developed headaches. They too took Tylenol from the same bottle Adam had used. Both also died shortly after. Over the next few days, 3 more people in the Chicago area, Mary McFarland, Paula Prince, and Mary Reiner, died under similar mysterious circumstances. All had taken extra-strength Tylenol capsules shortly before their deaths. Authorities quickly connected the deaths and discovered that the Tylenol capsules in several bottles had been laced with lethal doses of potassium cyanide, a highly toxic substance. Importantly, the tampering was found not to have occurred during manufacturing. Instead, someone had removed Tylenol bottles from store shelves, injected, or somehow inserted cyanide into the capsules, and then returned the tainted bottles to the shelves for unsuspecting customers to purchase. During the height of the investigation, a man named James W. Lewis sent a letter to Johnson & Johnson, the manufacturer of Tylenol, demanding $1 million to stop the killing. He was tracked down through the fingerprints on the envelope and arrested. However, he was never charged with the murders. He lived in New York City at the time and had no proven connection to the actual tampering in Chicago. He was convicted of extortion and sentenced to 13 years in prison. In response to the crisis, Johnson & Johnson acted swiftly and responsibly, halting Tylenol production and advertising. They also issued public warnings through the media and worked with police, who even used loudspeakers on patrol cars to warn residents. On October 5, 1982, the company issued a nationwide recall of over 31 million bottles of Tylenol, costing more than $100 million. In the aftermath, tamper-evident packaging became the new standard across the pharmaceutical industry, and the US Congress passed new anti-tampering laws. The FDA also issued regulations requiring tamper-resistant packaging for over-the-counter drugs. To this day, the perpetrator has never been identified. One key piece of evidence is a surveillance photo of victim Paula Prince purchasing a bottle of Tylenol at Walgreens in Chicago. In the image, a bearded man can be seen in the background. He remains a person of interest, but has never been identified or charged. On October 23, 2002, between 40 and 50 heavily armed and masked Chechen separatists stormed the Dubrovka Theater in Moscow, Russia, taking control of the building, where a sold-out performance of the Russian musical Nordost was underway. Nearly 850 people were inside the theater at the time. The hostage takers allowed some people to leave. Those with foreign passports, pregnant women, children, and Muslims were released. In total, between 150 and 200 hostages were freed during the first day. The remaining hostages were permitted to use their phones, and many called the authorities, alerting them to the scale of the crisis. Outside, Russian Special Forces Spetsnaz, soldiers, and police established a tight curtain around the building. The Chechen group, led by Mofsar Barayev, made their demands clear: the immediate and unconditional withdrawal of Russian forces from Chechnya within a week, an end to Russian air raids in Chechnya within 1 day, and a public declaration from President Vladimir Putin that Russia was making efforts to end the war in Chechnya. He also threatened that for every one of their members killed, they would execute 10 hostages. Russian negotiators offered the Chechen militants safe passage to any country other than Russia or Chechnya in exchange for the release of the hostages, but they quickly rejected this deal. At around 5 a.m. on October 26, Russian forces launched a highly controversial assault. They pumped an unidentified gas into the theater to incapacitate everyone inside. The method of delivery is still debated. Some reports suggest it was introduced through the theater's ventilation systems, while others point to a specially created hole in the wall or the area beneath the stage. At first, hostages and attackers mistook the gas for smoke from a fire. When they realized it was some form of chemical agent, panic broke out. Chechens equipped with gas masks donned them, and sporadic gunfire erupted between the militants and Russian forces outside. After about 90 minutes, Spetsnaz troops stormed the building. They eliminated all the hostage takers, whether conscious or incapacitated. Russian officials quickly declared the operation an overwhelming success, claiming that all hostages had been saved. However, the reality was far grimmer. By 7 a.m., the bodies of dozens of hostages, many unconscious or dead, were being carried out of the theater and laid on the pavement outside in the rain and snow. One witness described their faces as being waxy, white and drawn, with their eyes open and blank. The area outside the theater quickly filled with the bodies of hostages in various conditions. Medical efforts were severely hampered because Russian officials refused to disclose the nature of the gas, preventing doctors from administering proper treatment. Initially, the Russian government falsely claimed there were no hostage deaths, reassuring families even as bodies were being taken away. It was only later that the true scale of the tragedy would emerge. Hostages were held in hospitals under tight security, officially to prevent surviving militants from escaping by posing as hostages. Ultimately, at least 130 hostages died, the vast majority from the effects of the gas. Many survivors suffered long-term injuries and disabilities. The Russian government has never officially disclosed the exact composition of the gas. However, independent medical studies have concluded that the gas used was based on a derivative of fentanyl, a powerful synthetic opioid. Despite international criticism and public outrage, no Russian officials were ever held accountable for the massive loss of civilian life.